On December 1st, 2013, the skies above Guam filled with a sight so bizarre, it looked like a scene ripped from a dark comedy. From low-flying helicopters, thousands of tiny cardboard parachutes drifted down into the island's dense forests. They caught the sunlight as they spun, fluttering like fragile snowflakes on the tropical breeze. Each parachute carried a grim payload, a lifeless baby mouse, its body laced with a hidden poison. The world laughed. Headlines called it ridiculous. America is dropping dead mice out of helicopters. Critics sneered. Is this seriously how the US spends millions of taxpayer dollars? But 1 year later, nobody was laughing, because those parachuting mice were part of one of the strangest and most successful ecological rescue missions in modern history. This is the story of how a tropical island paradise was conquered by a snake that didn't belong, how its forests fell silent, its power grid went dark, and its people lived under constant siege, and how, in the face of collapse, scientists in the US military teamed up to unleash one of the strangest counterattacks the natural world has ever seen. Guam is tiny, just 31 miles long, 6 miles wide at its broadest point, but it's no ordinary dot on the map. Since World War II, it has been one of America's most strategically important outposts in the Pacific. But Guam's greatest battle wasn't fought with bombs or battleships. It began with a stowaway. Sometime after World War II, a snake, the brown tree snake, slipped aboard a cargo ship, or perhaps nestled inside the landing gear of an aircraft. It doesn't matter how. What matters is what happened when it slithered off into Guam's forests. The brown tree snake came from northern Australia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. In its home range, it wasn't special. Just another nocturnal predator, long and slender, creeping through the canopy in search of birds, eggs, lizards, and small mammals. But in Guam, it was an apex predator with no rivals. The island's birds had evolved for millennia with no snakes to fear. They nested in the open. They laid eggs unprotected. They perched low on branches, unaware that danger could come slithering up from below. The brown tree snake had found paradise. Prey everywhere, predators nowhere, in a warm, humid climate perfect for breeding. And once it gained a foothold, there was no stopping it.
At first, people barely noticed. A missing lizard here, a vanishing bird there. But within a generation, Guam's ecosystem collapsed. 10 out of 12 native bird species vanished. Gone, entirely wiped from the island. Birds that had once filled the forest with song were silenced. The Micronesian kingfisher, the Guam flycatcher, the rufous fantail, all gone. The few species that survived clung on in captive breeding programs. The wild forests grew eerily quiet. And that silence had consequences. Birds weren't just decoration, they were the island's gardeners. For thousands of years, they carried seeds across the forest, dropping them in new places, giving trees a chance to spread and regenerate. But with the birds gone, that system collapsed. Scientists found that tree regeneration had plummeted by over 90%. Seeds now fell and rotted beneath their parent trees. The forest stopped replenishing itself. Then came the spiders. Without birds to keep them in check, spider populations exploded. Webs stretched between branches like ghostly curtains. Studies showed Guam had 40 times more spiders than neighboring islands untouched by the snake invasion. And if you think the damage ended in the jungle, think again. The snakes didn't stay in the forests. They slithered into neighborhoods, into homes, and worst of all, into power lines. Brown tree snakes climb anything vertical. Trees, fences, utility poles. They'd curl into transformers and short out entire sections of the island's power grid. Guam suffered around 80 snake-induced blackouts every year. Each one cost thousands of dollars in lost business and repairs. In total, millions drained away annually. Tourism took a hit too. What traveler wants to visit a snake island where birds no longer sing and spiders carpet the trees? And looming above it all was the nightmare scenario: escape. Snakes were already hitchhiking and cargo bound for other Pacific islands. Hawaii was next. And if the brown tree snake reached Hawaii, it could erase species there just as it had on Guam, but on an even larger scale. What had begun as one snake slipping off a boat had become an ecological and economic catastrophe. Guam was losing the war. For decades, Guam tried everything. They trained dogs to sniff out snakes at airports and shipping yards, preventing escape. And the dogs worked. They intercepted hundreds of snakes that might have spread elsewhere. They set thousands of traps across neighborhoods and forests. But the snakes were too clever, too elusive, and there were too many. Some estimates place their density at 13,000 snakes per square mile in the northern forests, higher than predator densities in the Amazon rainforest. Conservationists tried hunting, fencing, even experimenting with chemical deterrents. Nothing dented the population. By 2013, the numbers were staggering. Nearly 2 million snakes on an island smaller than the city of Los Angeles. The conclusion was inescapable. If Guam wanted to save its remaining wildlife, it couldn't just trap snakes one by one. It needed a weapon that could strike thousands at once. That weapon came from an unlikely source: the medicine cabinet. Scientists discovered something remarkable. The common painkiller acetaminophen, sold worldwide as Tylenol, is harmless to most animals at low doses, but to brown tree snakes, it's lethal. Just 80 milligrams, about 1/16 of a standard human pill, could kill a snake. The challenge was delivery. How do you get a scattered population of tree-dwelling nocturnal snakes to swallow poison without harming other wildlife? The answer was grimly ingenious: dead mice. Brown tree snakes are opportunistic hunters. A lifeless mouse dangling in the canopy is irresistible. So scientists devised a delivery system: cardboard parachutes designed to tangle in the treetops, each carrying a single poisoned mouse. Drop them from the air, and the snakes would do the rest. It sounded insane. But in 2013, the U.S. Department of Agriculture launched an $8 million program to try it. And so, on that quiet Sunday morning, helicopters skimmed Guam's forests, releasing waves of parachuting mice. To some, it looked like madness. To Guam, it was a last stand. When word got out, the ridicule was immediate. News outlets mocked the idea. Memes spread online. America is at war with snakes, and the weapons are parachuting rodents. Animal rights groups, including PETA, condemned the operation as cruel, arguing that poisoning any animal caused needless suffering. Critics said it was wasteful, grotesque, doomed to fail. But scientists pushed back. Acetaminophen was chosen precisely because it was so targeted. Lethal to snakes, but harmless to birds, pigs, and Guam's other wildlife. And while the image of parachuting rodents looked absurd, the design was brilliant. By hanging up in the canopy, the poison mice were accessible to snakes but out of reach for most other creatures. Still, the world watched with skepticism. Could this bizarre plan really work? By 2014, the results were undeniable. In the drop zones, snake populations plummeted. Some areas saw reductions of 50% or more. For the first time in decades, birdwatchers reported something extraordinary: the return of native species. Micronesian kingfishers, Guam rails. Their calls echoed again in forests that had been silent for years. Even Guam's infrastructure improved. Snake-induced power outages dropped in frequency, saving millions. Telemetry from radio-tagged mice confirmed that snakes were taking the bait quickly, swallowing the poison before scavengers could interfere. What had once been ridiculed as a cartoonish stunt was now hailed as a pioneering model for invasive species control. Other islands plagued by invasive predators began studying Guam's approach. The parachuting mice weren't just a quirky experiment. They were proof of concept, a way to fight back against invasions that seemed unstoppable. But Guam's war isn't finished. The island's dense northern jungles remain full of snakes. Total eradication may be impossible with current tools. Instead, the focus has shifted to containment, protecting bird habitats, reducing populations in sensitive areas, and preventing the snakes from ever leaving the island again. Ports and airports remain on constant alert. Dogs still sniff every shipment. The nightmare of a snake-infested Hawaii hovers like a storm cloud. In 2020, the U.S. pledged another $3.4 million to continue snake control efforts. More research, more innovation, and maybe more parachuting mice. Because as strange as it sounds, those tiny dead rodents gave Guam something it hadn't had in decades: hope. When the story first broke, the world laughed at the absurdity. Dead mice falling from helicopters? It sounded like the plot of a bad comedy. But in reality, it was science at its most creative, turning a common painkiller into a targeted weapon, designing parachutes for rodents, and fighting a war not with bombs, but with biology. Guam's forests may never be what they once were, but thanks to parachuting mice, they have a chance. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the strangest ideas, the ones that sound laughable, even insane, are the ones that just might save the world. So, the next time you hear about parachuting mice, ask yourself, is it a joke or is it genius?